Cuba is cracking down on critics. This unlikely dissident says he'll protest anyway. Cubans have spent too much time in silence, Garcia Aguilera said during an interview in his cramped apartment in the downtrodden San Agustín neighborhood of Havana. It's time to open our mouths with liberty and say what we think. Garcia Aguilera is not the typical anti-government Cuban dissident. He has worked for years in state-run theater and television productions, is critical of the U.S. embargo on the island and says he is more liberal than Cuba's conservative leadership. Cuban state-run media this week compared him to renowned Czech playwright and human rights advocate Václav Havel, although the description was not meant as a compliment. His planned march is intended to call for democratic reforms to the Caribbean nation's political system, as well as the release of political prisoners. In response, the Cuban state has targeted him with an onslaught of accusations. Cuban state TV has broadcast recording of Garcia Aguilera's personal phone calls and aired programs alleging murky ties between the playwright and dark forces allegedly bent on toppling Cuba's more than six-decade-old revolution.
In one phone call, Garcia Aguilera can be heard having a perfunctory conversation with a well-known anti-Castro Cuban exile Ramon Saul Sanchez, who offers Garcia Aguilera his support. Cuban government officials treated the call as damning evidence that the playwright has been in touch with Cuban exiles in Florida, whom the government accuses of plotting terrorist attacks on the island. And in a video that aired Monday on the Cuba's Reasons television program, a local doctor named Carlos Leonardo Vázquez González showed photos of a conference that he said he attended with Garcia Aguilera and other Cuban government critics in Madrid in 2019. Vázquez González also said in the program that he was actually a double agent, reporting back to Cuban state security on Garcia Aguilera. What we are seeing in Unia is the creation and performance of a counter-revolutionary, Vázquez González said. Garcia Aguilera confirmed the authenticity of the phone call and the conference but said they were misrepresented on TV. He denies receiving any funding from foreign governments or exile groups, and insists that he is pushing for democratic change from within Cuba using legal avenues. In support of his plan to protest, Garcia Aguilera formed a group called Archipelago, which has over 31,000 followers on Facebook. Group members say they too are harassed for their activism, and complain of being followed by plainclothes state security agents and receiving threats by government officials. He blamed the government for the vandalism, saying that police monitoring his house would have been aware of who was responsible. Cuban officials have not responded to his allegations of harassment. Nevertheless, Garcia Aguilera and a handful of other protest organizers say they are intent on moving forward with their planned march. They say they want peaceful protesters arrested after demonstrations on July 11 to be released, more guarantees for individual freedoms and a lifting of official censorship. A dangerous time to protest. Speaking out against the island's communist-run government carries even greater risks than usual, after the state was rattled by widespread protests in July, increased U.S. economic sanctions and the implosion of their tourism industry during the pandemic. While government officials said they targeted protesters who attacked police and looted stores, dozens of people said they were violently arrested for marching peacefully or merely filming the protests. Government officials insist that the island's constitution grants Cubans the right to protest, but in practice, demonstrations are quickly broken up by police and government critics are accused of being mercenaries in the employ of Cuba's Cold War nemesis, the United States. Having different opinions, including political ones, doesn't constitute a crime, said Ruben Remigio Ferro, the president of the Supreme People's Court of Cuba, at a press conference in July shortly after the protests. Thinking differently, questioning what's going on, to demonstrate is not a crime. The Cuban government, however, has described the planned marches as a pretext invented by Cuban exiles and the U.S. government that would lead to an invasion of Cuba by the enemy. It has announced island-wide military exercises for the same day. Promoters, their public projections and ties with subversive organizations or agencies financed by the U.S. government have the open intention of changing the political system in our country, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel said at a speech before the Central Committee of the Cuban Communist Party in October. Already Cuba's state-run media has broadcast images of militias training with AK-47s and members of committees for the defense of the revolution patrolling streets with metal batons. Garcia Aguilera has since moved the proposed march from November 20th to November 15th, although the Cuban government is unlikely to allow protesters to take part regardless of the date. He said the government's overreaction to his proposed march has only proven his point. They have shown there's no rule of law, he said. There's no possibility for citizens to legally, peacefully and orderly show their dissent to those power. With so much tension in the air, it's unclear how many Cubans will join Garcia Aguilera's call to protest, but already the initiative threatens to further deteriorate frayed US and Cuban relations. The Cuban regime is failing to meet the people's most basic needs. That includes food. That includes medicine. Now is a chance to listen to the Cuban people and to make a positive change, State Department spokesman Ned Price said in October. The Biden administration has warned the Cuban government that if it prevents the march from taking place, the island could face further economic sanctions.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.